Seems after World War II, nationalism became this ill-defined and very loaded concept and a complete joke. It's really reserved for the most deranged brand of lunatic, the MK Ultra lab rats wandering around 4th of July parades with ill intention. Patriotism in the West now is to be the living, breathing meme, the middle-aged Karen boomer cradling a Glock and a Bible in her profile photo. She's really akin to the uncouth pariah, beneath any level of civility or human decency. Her pride is in the once most successful nation on the planet. Where are the nationalists in mainstream media that aren't dissolving into these gun-hoarding terrorists or violent instigators you always see? Labeling people a Nazi or fear-mongering fascist has been a useful linguistic tool. It's used to guilt people into remaining silent about conservatism or chastising questions of why a global banking system, every media source, virtually all entertainment, nearly all the world's gold and silver is in very, very few hands. It's like they say, to learn who rules over you, you simply have to find out who you're not allowed to criticize. The silent majority's large numbers Trump exposed, right? In 2016, it exposed all these frustrated people. They feel like they've been losing their way or losing their place in their own country. The once majority in the US is becoming obsolete, not by accident. Citizens recoil in horror at any whiff of civic pride after 1960s counterculture. The West is expected to feel ashamed of what they are. A lot of Brits, the Canadians, and the Americans. Keeping a populace disconnected and poorly educated, like it allows for a streamlined shift in engineering. The good news is, we have a stubborn differentiation ingrained. It's making this kind of brute force imposition take a long time, like a drip feed. You saw this during the vaccine fallout a few years ago, or the trucker revolution, which was deemed problematic and stamped out by Canada's government. Justin Trudeau, he declared martial law because the truckers were speaking out. Organic counterculture and these coordinated rebellions, they aren't acceptable to managerialism, not unless they've enacted it themselves. This empire no one is to mention looms over the bread and circuses. It's fascinating to me when you consider how, in both the modern day and the past peasant, they've been despised by the left. Marx's manifesto called them straight-up idiots. Both he and Engels, both of course rich men, were supposed to be representing the working class. Not the version that valued faith and family though, because they're the ultimate form of despicable existence. Progress is to continue on and spiral until societal collapse. Faith must be finally solved and thrown away. So too must marriage and any kind of decency. This is in the name of the state and the progress, right? The progress that continuously looms on and on. Conservatives blame individuals if they're not succeeding enough through their own willpower. That's really the sad truth. They're as cucked as anyone else, honoring this merit-based achievement brand of debt slavery as a virtue. Average men don't make for worldly capitalists. Where is the peasant to turn when hated on every side? Push them hard enough though, and they're slow to move, they'll openly revolt. European and Western history books though, they tend to keep that quiet. Farming now, like anything else, has been consolidated. They're owned by 5 corporations. The peasant more or less just doesn't even exist anymore. Or we've just all become one, without the skill necessary to subsist off the land. A nation that rejects its own values through this orchestrated disinformation is not a modern concept. It's been utilized by colonizers and Marxists, and in deculturalization and, in the worst cases, genocide. The Bolshevik Revolution, the undertaught attack on Christian Russian culture, killed tens of millions and literally destroyed an entire nation. It seems subverting an entire culture is kind of a problem. It's been theorized that this wokey Cold War the West has been in is the shift towards a post-national state, a state of no borders and hegemonized culture. This form of inward colonialism. It's different than the revolutions of yesteryear, right? Because you can't quite put your finger on it because we're living it. But it's no less bureaucratic and full of the same contempt and hatred. I was in Toronto last summer. You can really feel this in real time in Canada. Walking through this overpriced and borderless anti-culture. It's a city with no identity. It's like toiling away into poverty and funding scooter lanes on the highway. The west and south side of Chicago, it's starting to shun any kind of new technology to aid with the shootings and the gun warfare on the street, and removing cash bonds to continue in this crime-filled erosion. The Midwest as a whole feels like a land at the end of its own time. It's rotting from within. Indianapolis is a homeless refugee camp and nobody gives a shit. It's amusing the public rallying and calling for decolonization in the West. It's become a cliche for like Middle Eastern and African and Latin cultures and the like, but there's really no concern for their own culture. It's like being dismantled in front of their own eyes. The West is being bled dry, and people tend to scoff at the word techno-feudalism, but what the hell else should it be called? In my opinion, America's own governing body is cannibalizing its own populace. Foreign invaders and traditional colonizers just aren't needed like they used to be. Just subversive transnational elites that's forcing this technocratic utopia on all of us, our way of life, and soon probably everywhere else. What makes this Western version of inward destruction unique? And I'm not discounting Russia, they might be the first. This could be the first case of a nation actually colonizing itself in human history. It speaks to how hard it's been to topple the West. It's kind of being done through the lining of pockets and lobbying influences that have no interest in its own citizens. Americans are taught not to question, but how do we all just collectively agree that the Federal Reserve, this privately owned institution that can create ones and zeros out of thin air and override spiking interest rates at whim, is beneficial for any of us? It's the largest conflict of interest in human history, and yet here we are, 100 years later. Mortgages the average normie can't afford. The most powerful men in history are those that are unified and free of complete moral burden, not the Hollywood soldiers engaged in heroic acts, but the conniving schemers that are hiding in plain sight, adding to their golden vaults as we speak. These like CCP-owned ideas and algorithms are looped in our children's phones and their beds. Kind of discounts the needs for traditional invaders and soldiers. Propaganda that really no longer has to contend with these barriers of the sea. It does feel like we've been sold out now, and we're in this transactional process of being given away. Atheists in Muslim countries aren't exactly where pampered normal people are looking to live. I wonder what Saudi Arabia thinks of inclusionary feminist politics. Would they open their wealth and subvert their cultural norms for the pink-haired 400-pound lesbian, or treat them like fucking queens? Entertainment and games mostly being objectively terrible now. It's been the side effect of the world growing a lot smaller. Insular culture and prideful gatekeeping have always been components of the artistic process in its communities. If you've ever been like a musician or an artist, or been around tattoo artists, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's why the atomically driven Japanese can give something that no other country can. Look at the dominance of Dark Souls and Elden Ring and like this collective gamer consciousness. I talked about on my channel before that kids are more into anime now than ever, as Western animation hardly even exists. I saw that BlackRock is starting to buy property and get more involved in Japanese culture, and companies like Square Enix are trying to become more woke, but they're just not very good at it yet. But as of right now, they still kind of remain the last bastion in video games and entertainment. I haven't seen it yet, but apparently the new Godzilla movie fucking slays. It's supposed to be one of the best. There's like a twisted sense of cynicism and waking reality becoming worse at the same time every form of escapist media does. There's really no rest from the regime's sermons, not even in your Apple Vision Pros. Speaking of that, I think the images and whole visual advertising campaign can summarize how the aesthetic of this sleek global corporatism is fucking puke-worthy. Beards and afros strapped into like an enlarged swollen face shield. The women models have beige and one-piece turtleneck dresses and they're posed on Freudian couches. This can't be the future, guys. Where's Gene Roddenberry to save us? Oh yeah, dead. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting tired of this repulsive vision we're still being sold. Depends on who you ask, but most people would say it's been about a decade of video games becoming worse and worse. So after 10 years of that, Sony's become a movie game studio. Xbox and Microsoft has just finally given up on that console because nobody's buying it. Game Pass is like a cool idea, but I'd rather just buy games on Steam for cheap, and I think a lot of people are the same. Final Fantasy 16 was one of the few reasons to own a PS5, and I didn't finish it, but it kind of ended up being like a neutered cutscene. The side quest pacing could strangle a cat. Then Abby, she drops a hammer and sickle-sized dump on the Last of Us franchise's puckered lips. Really, the confused nerd and black-pilled gamer are politicking and blaming one another for like this rot overtaking characters and stories that meant something to people. I think at our core we're myopic. It's ingrained in this human tribalistic monkey brain to begin lashing out. This monkey brain looking for people to blame as normalcy begins to destabilize. Seems oftentimes people question, why is this happening, or why are these politics being forced in entertainment media? Any governing body knows its people can overthrow them, and they despise them for it. The French Revolution was a thing of the past, but it can still happen, right? They look at you and me like animals pacing restlessly behind bars, the unmanageable serfdom. We become violent and aware when not distracted. Through demoralization, these endless news feeds and clickbait, we're led to feel that our own leading class is inscrutable, individual future and agency just not in our control. Feels like, I don't know, these bureaucratic systems that hang in tangled wiring like an Indian power grid cannot be deciphered. This culture of death is naturalistic and acceptable if the majority have given in to post-truth. History often repeats itself, and though there's new patterns emerging, there's nothing new under the sun. Humans and their leaders don't change much internally. Of looking at things through the Abrahamic God's perspective, he puts human beings above angels, any of the animals. He holds them at the highest regard of his creation, and sometimes can be a little hard to fathom. I personally work with some of the most challenging people there are on a day-to-day basis. I trust my own dog more than I do my fellow man, but we're capable of great change and growth and beautiful works of art. If we weren't, I wouldn't be here babbling on about this kind of subversion we're all going through. C.S. Lewis was warning us against this ideological war in the 1930s with his space trilogy. And so it seems the Western man and their art are being colonized and torn asunder. Are we to become forgotten myths too, or does none of this even fucking matter when larger existential threats are looming? If Connor Leahy, aka John Connor, is to be believed, a coder who reverse engineered OpenAI in 2019, he says AI will become godlike in probably another 5 years. He said making a sandwich has more regulation attached than this tech does. Of course, any company supporting AI and supporting its growth is shoveling money into their mouths. Tribesman Sam Altman has the deadest eyes I've ever seen, so that bodes well. Black box neural networks and systemic biological-like systems are going to be smarter than any thinking and reasoning human being, and they're advancing swiftly. Corporations certainly don't give a shit about safeguards, and they're as stupid as anyone else. Men who lack any kind of form of emotional intelligence and empathy are leading the way in this revolution. Governments with archaic systems and implementing new legislation are sitting on their hands. Even the most tired and overworked normie can see where this is all heading. We're talking about the days of the Egyptians and the Israelites. Except there will be no parting of the Red Sea, just perpetual slavery to the robo-overlords and technocrats. The peasant revolution will be snuffed out Minority Report style before it can even be thought of. Welcome to hell.